And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. One man, one microphone, one mission, one message. True News, the only newscast reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Here is end-time newsman Rick Wiles.
This is True News, 1 hour of uncensored news, views, and commentary. Welcome to the program. I'm Rick Wiles. Investment strategist Michael Pento will join me to discuss the ongoing march into a deep global depression. Michael will be here in just a few minutes. First, today's top news headlines. A Texas grand jury has cleared a local Planned Parenthood affiliate of criminal accusations of selling human baby organs and body parts, and then turned around and indicted the two pro-life Christians whose secret recordings expose Planned Parenthood's grotesque business of trafficking in fetal tissue. David Daleiden and Sandra Merritt were indicted on charges of tampering with a government record. They posed as executives of a fictional biomedical research company in order to video record Planned Parenthood doctors and clinic managers bragging about harvesting fetal tissue. The grand jury accused Mr. Daleiden, the lead investigator for the Center for Medical Progress, with violation of Texas law that prohibits the purchase and sale of human organs. In other words, the Houston area grand jury exonerated Planned Parenthood officials of selling baby parts, but now seeks to imprison Mr. Daleiden and Sandra Merritt for the crime of filming them talking about selling baby parts. Only in a Nazi country would something like this happen. If the two Christian pro-life activists are found guilty and imprisoned for setting up a sting operation to catch Planned Parenthood doctors bragging about selling baby organs, then all police sting operations must also be prosecuted. For example, it was recently revealed that the FBI operated one of the Internet's largest child pornography websites. The FBI allowed users to download tens of thousands of pornographic images and videos of children from a government website that was based in the Washington suburbs. It is the third time in recent years that it's been revealed that the FBI took control of child porn websites, but allowed them to operate in order to catch the users of child pornography. If the pro-life Christian filmmakers are guilty of setting up a sting operation to catch Planned Parenthood officials in criminal acts, should not the FBI officials be arrested for operating child porn websites? The Harris County, Texas District Attorney's Office has a serious conflict of interest in this case. Lauren Reeder is a prosecutor in the District Attorney's Office. She also is a member of the board of directors of the local Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast affiliate. Former Judge Andrew Napolitano described the indictment Monday on Fox News as a political hit job. I have observed over the years that there are 6 deadly topics you cannot discuss in public in the United States of America without suffering severe consequences. Number 1, abortion. Number 2, homosexuality. Number 3, pornography. Number 4, the Federal Reserve Bank. Number 5, the IRS and the income tax system. And number 6, Zionism. These topics are closely guarded by the elite. The ruling cabal will come after you with knives if you dare to expose their sins in any of the topics I just mentioned. Fears about the Zika virus have gone viral. The mysterious mosquito-borne virus is linked to birth defects. The U.S. Director of the National Institutes of Health is concerned the virus could spread to regions of America where 60% of the U.S. population lives. In a blog post, NIH Director Dr. Francis Collins cited a study published January 14 in which researchers predicted the Zika virus could spread in areas along the east and west coast of the United States and much of the Midwest during the warmer months, where about 200 million people live. The study also showed that another 22.7 million people live in humid parts of the country where mosquitoes carry the virus year-round. On Monday, the World Health Organization predicted the virus would spread to all countries across the Americas except Canada and Chile. The virus has been linked to brain damage in thousands of babies in Brazil. Babies infected with the virus are being born with abnormally small heads. Over 3,000 babies with small heads were born in Brazil last year. El Salvador urged women to avoid becoming pregnant for the next 2 years. And last week in Florida, 3 Americans returned from Venezuela, Colombia, with the Zika virus. Thousands of Cuban refugees are poised to cross over the Mexican border into South Texas in coming days. KRGV-TV reports that at least 7,000 men, women, and children will seek entry through the port of entry in Laredo and at the Hidalgo International Bridge in Hidalgo, Texas. A European Union official said that nearly 2/3 of the migrants entering Europe are not war refugees. Most of them are economic migrants from northern Africa. Frans Timmermans, the European Commission's first vice president, told a Dutch broadcast radio station that the numbers are far higher than countries are being told. He said, quote, more than half of the people now coming to Europe come from countries where you can assume they have no reason whatsoever to ask for refugee status. More than half, 60%, end of quote. The commissioner said the countries that they're coming from include Morocco and Tunisia. Europe's passport-free travel zone will be suspended for 2 years as EU officials scramble to stop the mass migration of people from the Middle East and northern Africa. The European Commission will now work on emergency measures for a new system of border controls to prevent migrants getting from Greece to Germany. EU officials are also planning to quarantine Greece for several years. The officials are demanding that the Greek government build and maintain vast refugee resettlement camps that could hold hundreds of thousands of refugees in Greece for years. An alleged rape of a 13-year-old girl in Germany has sparked a diplomatic spat between Germany and Russia. The student, identified as Lisa, was reported missing on January 11th. She resurfaced 30 hours later and filed a police report claiming to have been abducted by a Middle Eastern man and raped by him and 2 other men. The girl is the child of Russian immigrants living in Berlin. Germany denies the girl was raped for 30 hours. Thousands of Russians living in Germany have joined in protest rallies to demand that the police investigate the alleged rape of the young teenager. In Sweden, police officers had to run for safety after being surrounded by an angry mob of Muslim migrants when the cops went to rescue a 10-year-old boy who had been repeatedly raped by the Muslim men. The police leapt through a fire exit after being surrounded by the Muslim mob. The incident comes on the heels of the murder of a young Swedish woman who worked at a refugee center. She was stabbed to death earlier this week by a 15-year-old Muslim boy. It's time for a short break. Michael Pento's coming up next, right here on True News.
You're listening to True News, the end-time newscast. Rick will return after this announcement.
New scientific research has revealed the damaging effects that pornography has on the brain. The shocking brain scans of a heroin addict and a guy hooked on porn show they're nearly identical. A new 6-disc film series teaches men biblical strategies to find freedom through the renewal of the mind. Order it online at conquerseries.com. Hundreds of thousands of men are finding freedom from porn through the powerful strategies taught in the Conquer series. Get the 6-disc DVD set for you and your church men's group at conquerseries.com.
Christians are imperfect humans who are required to live a holy life. That's a tall order. Here's A Moment with Charles Stanley.
Now, I wonder how many of you feel inadequate to live the Christian life. I certainly do. When I was saved at the age of 12, the pastor told me, he said, Charles, you be a good boy, and you'll grow up. He says, you be a good boy, and one of these days you'll grow up and you'll die and go to heaven. You know, I tried to be good. I read the Bible, and I prayed, and I fasted, and I did all kind of things. I finally discovered I couldn't be very good at times. And it took me a long time to realize that God's grace was far more adequate than I am. And He knew... He knew I couldn't be good, and He knew the Apostle Paul couldn't be good, and that's why He sent the Holy Spirit, because He knew we could not live the Christian life. But that's what I believe, because that's what I was taught. When He says, be ye holy even as I'm holy, you and I can't live a holy life apart from the work of the Holy Spirit in our life. A holy life doesn't mean a sinless life, but it means a life that's bent toward God. And a life that once there is sin, there is quick confession, repentance, and moving on. You don't have a pity party and say, oh, God, what about this? No, you just confess it and move on, because He's already forgiven you at the cross. And we walk, listen, He says if we walk in the light, and we're walking in the light because He's living on the inside of us. He sealed us, He says, unto the day of redemption, not until I sin again. He sealed me unto the day of redemption. We are forever His children. And we're living in His Spirit and by His Spirit. But you see, if a person doesn't understand that, and I lived for years and years and years and didn't realize who was on the inside of me, what God was willing to do, what He was able to do, I just thought I had to do it. But to realize that it wasn't my responsibility was a liberating, freeing truth.
Learn more about every believer's helper, the Holy Spirit, when you visit intouch.org.
This is Max McLean. What are some ways to express our gratitude for God's great salvation? Listen to the Bible from Ephesians 5. Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us, and gave Himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you, there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. From Ephesians 5. Listen to the Bible. It's great for the soul.
Hear more at radiobible.org. That's radiobible.org.
Reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ, you're listening to True News, the end-time newscast.
This is True News, your best choice for a different perspective on global news, events, and trends. I'm Rick Wiles. China's Shanghai stock market plunged more than 6% on Tuesday amid concerns that money is fleeing the Asian giant. Meanwhile, the U.S. federal government will be staring at a whopping $30 trillion debt within a decade, according to a report issued by the Congressional Budget Office. An aging baby boomer population, new government spending, and increased cost of Obamacare will contribute to the ballooning deficit. Michael Pento, president and founder of Pento Portfolio Strategies, is on the telephone to comment on the current state of the world financial system. He is the author of the book, The Coming Bond Market Collapse. Michael, welcome back to True News.
Thanks for having me back, Rick.
Michael, where are we right now in the current breakup of the global financial system?
Well, we're in the early innings, but it's definitely after the fat lady, did the national anthem, and the game is truly on its way. There are no free markets left in the world. Global central banks have distorted every asset class on the planet. And in doing so, they have levered up the entire worldwide amount of debt to an unprecedented level. Now, central bankers gathered in Davos this past week, and it's clear to me that there's no limit to the amount of paper confetti that they will print, and there is no escape from their domination of interest rates, domination of sovereign debt market, and domination of all markets. So we're in a deep, deep, deep hole.
It appears that the people in control of the Western financial system are out of control. It's like they're driving the crazy train right off the cliff.
Rick, it's not just you, your astute audience, some people on the fringe like me who are occasionally popped up on the financial media and try to warn people about the madness that has occurred, really started since 1971 and certainly is reaching its apogee today. Look around at whatever there any vestige of free market left in the world. What are those prices telling you? So let's look at commodity prices at 15-year lows. Let's look at the fact that 50% of the S&P 500 is down more than 25%. That is a brutal bear market in more than half of the stocks outside of, maybe Amazon and Facebook. The Russell 2000 is in a bear market. The transportation is in a bear market. And I want to say something. I like so much coming on programs like you because they offer me a platform and a venue that I can tell the audience the truth. Now, let me ask you, how many times have you heard in the financial media, mainstream financial media, that lower oil prices are wonderful for the consumer and that will boost consumption any minute now?
Well, that's the standard line that they're pumping out.
That's the standard line. Now, let me tell you the truth. While lower oil prices are wonderful in the long term, they are also a symptom of this global depression, recession, deflation that we have entered into. So oil prices at the nadir of the Great Recession in March of 2009 say something about global demand. Now, it's not just, by the way, that oil is down. It's soybeans, it's cotton, it's base metals, it's everything. Every commodity is down. Now, logically, think about this, and this will prove my point that this is not about some sudden surge in supply in oil that says nothing about demand waning globally. If oil is down from $100 and something a barrel, it was $147 in 2008, to $30 a barrel, where it sits around $30 in WTI today, why are the transportation stocks down 29%? I mean, you would think that rails and shippers and trucks, these companies would be soaring because of the lower oil price. But these companies are screaming something to you. The Dow Jones Transportation Average is confirming to anybody who has ears and an open mind that unfortunately global central banks and Machiavellian governments have caused and engendered a global depression, and it's just now getting started.
Michael, was there a pivot in late September, early October in the markets?
Well, I'll tell you when the pivot really was. It was October, but it was 2014. Do you know what ended? What famous program ended in October of 2014? It was quantitative easing. We had 3 rounds of it. I count 4 rounds of $3.8 trillion of confetti printed out of nothing, shoved into the vaults of banks, and that pushed interest rates to a record low. That ended in October of 2014, and the markets have gone nowhere but flat and now have rolled over sharply beginning in January. And it's not just the fact that the United States has tightened monetary policy. Yes, they have tightened monetary policy. They raised rates by 25 basis points. No, that's not a lot. But they're the only central bank now, major central bank, that's not engaged in QE. I'll tell you this, what else happened in January too? China has had a huge problem with their renminbi. It is absolutely desirous of crashing. And that's because the Chinese, the megalomaniac communists in China, have increased debt 28 times, not 28%, 28 times since the year 2000 to build cities and bridges and tunnels to nowhere. So it's a huge fixed asset bubble with no economic gain, with no increase in productivity, yet all that debt remains. And they're struggling to prop up their currency. How do they do that? They sell their currency reserves. They've got $3 trillion plus in U.S. treasuries. They sell those dollars. They buy back the renminbi, and they take that currency offline. So the Bank of China is tightening. The U.S. Federal Reserve is tightening. And you have the two biggest governments in the world that are trying to pull back from this monetary madness that has gone on rampant. As I said, it started in 1971. It was picked up in 2000. It was dramatically stepped up in 2008. And now they're finally starting to try to get back to normal. And we see what happens. The asset bubbles that they work so hard creating are crashing.
I noticed that in October 2015 and in November, December, there was a steady decline in economic activity, manufacturing and retail sales and so forth. And so then we see in early January 2016, we see this drastic drop in overseas shipping, in rail freight, in trucking. And so there's obviously about a 90-day lag, and we're seeing these waves coming in 90-day increments. And so now the shipping industry is shutting down, and hardly anything is moving on the seas. There's a 5% weekly decline in U.S. rail traffic every week since the beginning of October. So at some point, Michael, if this continues, if the ships aren't coming in and the railways don't have anything to pick up at the docks and haul across America, at some point the warehouses are empty. And so are we looking at in 90 to 120 days, are we going to start seeing shortages of items?
Well, there's a huge inventory correction occurring right now. Chinese rail freight is down 10.5% year over year. Now, how could a nation grow at 6.8% if their rail freight volume is down 10.5%? Have these people stopped eating? Have they lost their physical bodies and become spirits and they don't need anything tangible to exist? No. China is in a recession. Japan is in a recession. The entire developed world is either growing at 0.5% or maybe at the best 1%, or in an outright depression if you go to Brazil or Russia. And even Canada is in a recession. The whole world is slowing dramatically. And the only thing, if you listen carefully to what they were saying in Davos, Switzerland, they had Kuroda, the central banker from Japan, said he can actually monetize, purchase, and own the remaining 2/3 of Japanese government bonds that he doesn't already hold. And he laughs like a buffoon. This is unprecedented. I'm not a Cassandra. You're not a Cassandra. We're not trying to scare people. We're trying to reveal the truth to people. You have a central banker in a public forum claiming and espousing to his constituency. Actually, they're not even constituents because they never voted for this guy. But to the populace, the citizenry of Japan, that he's willing to buy every single Japanese government bond that is in existence. And that's why the Japanese stock market rallied 900 points the night after he spoke those words. Then you had the Mario Draghi, who was printing 60 billion euros a month from nothing. And he says that this program can be extended even more, even though it was extended just 60 days ago. I mean, you have to be a complete moron not to see that these central bankers are doing one thing and one thing only: keeping banks afloat by keeping asset prices in the stratosphere. And the moment they stop, I mean, it's not just enough to keep QE static. They have to top themselves on a monthly basis. Hey, here's some more QE. Let's get the Japanese stock market even higher. But here's what's happening, Rick. These asset prices are becoming more and more detached from the underlying fundamental economy that supposedly supports asset prices, mainly stocks, real estate, and equities. And that's why this recession is going to be so brutal. But here's the salient point I want to get across to your audience. There's nothing the central banks can do now other than print more money. They can't lower borrowing costs. They're at zero across the entire planet in the developed world. They're at zero. Even negative rates in Europe, we have half of 1%. I mean, what is the Fed going to do? Take back the 25 basis point rate hike? I mean, that's all they can do.
So the pusher can't withdraw the needle from the veins of the junkie.
Well, it gets even worse. So not only can central banks no longer provide debt service relief, as they did in 2008, they took rates from 5.25 to 0, but governments are now insolvent. You know, the debt to GDP back in 2008 in the United States was 60%. Not so bad, not great, but not horrible, not horrific. Now it's 102 and rising quickly. You said in your introduction, 30 trillion, according to the CBO. I can tell you that's way too optimistic. There's no recession in that forecast. That baseline forecast that you mentioned contains no recessions. Growth of 2.5%. Rick, we haven't seen 2.5% growth since before the Great Recession. The economy grew at 2% at best. Now it's growing at 0.7%. We haven't had a recession for 7 years. Now, the average recession took the stock market down 37%. So this is not good. Central banks are insolvent. They're impotent and insolvent. Governments can't really take any more debt. Otherwise, you're going to look like Greece in 2012. This is the big problem that no one's talking about. This is the problem where people come out and say, China is not relevant anymore. You know, this Wall Street is an odious institution. This is the same group of people who told you, go out and buy stocks. Things are great. Look how strong the demand is for oil. Look how strong China is. That's where all the growth is going to be for S&P 500 companies. And now that oil and China have pooped the bed, they're out there telling you that China is now irrelevant and oil prices that are crashing are great for the consumer. What a hateful institution Wall Street is.
Michael, let's talk about oil. You know, the last several days, the mainstream news media, or I should say the establishment news media here in the United States, has tried to promote the storyline that oil is climbing once again, and, you know, that it hit bottom and now it's going back up. I don't see any indication that oil is going to climb. I mean, the world is drowning in oil. But we're already seeing a spike in bankruptcies of oil and energy companies. Are we going to see a dramatic increase in defaults by the spring of 2016?
Yes, you absolutely are. I mean, first of all, you can make a cogent argument that oil is going to bottom around $25, $30 a barrel in West Texas Intermediate. But does anybody really believe it can go back to 60 or 70 in the next few months? And that's where most of these producers are. That's where their break-even costs are. And that's why you're seeing these junk bond spreads blow out. But it's not just in oil, Rick. There's problems all over the world. You know, you have a lot of these foreign countries that took on a tremendous amount of dollar-denominated debt. Now, Janet Yellen and the Fed, these are feckless, clueless people. They're always fighting the wrong battle. They have no idea what they're doing. They're looking for hyperinflation to come out of the woodwork from too many people working. Imagine that, worrying about how many people have a job, and they're worried about inflation coming from people working. You know, inflation comes from when the market finds that your currency is going to lose its purchasing power. That's where inflation comes from. Inflation is the product of central bankers. It's not the product of productive population. So this is not very good news for the economy. It's not very good for the middle class. But these central bankers are hell-bent on raising rates 4 times in 2016. This is their dot plot scenario. Why? Because we have a bogus 280,000 people working on the non-farm payroll report. They're worried about some hyperinflation coming. So they're on record saying they're going to strengthen the dollar even further. That's going to put more pressure on the trillions of dollars of loans that were borrowed by these emerging markets. these loans get harder to pay back, and the defaults are going to skyrocket, not just in the fracking industry, but across the globe. This is going to be a brutal recession. Central banks and sovereigns have no ability to stop it, and I think the defaults are just getting started, unfortunately.
Do you think the Fed will go through with their planned rate hikes this year?
No, I don't. I think I know they raise in December. March is the next possible time that they do. Maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. But at some time in the very near future, Janet Yellen and company are going to have to admit their failure. Their failure to save the economy by keeping interest rates at zero, printing trillions of dollars, and indebting consumers and corporations and the federal government. That's all they've done, by the way. If you look at the data, I mean, the Fed's own data scream their failure out very, very loudly. You know, they have an increase of $2 trillion in corporate debt. Sovereign debt is up $8 trillion on the publicly traded level. Consumer debt, household debt is $14.1 trillion, back to a record high. So what have they really accomplished here? They've indebted the private and public sectors completely insolvent. And the only thing that's keeping this economy afloat is 0% interest rates. They threaten to take that away. And what happens, Rick? Their asset bubbles collapse right in their face. Janet Yellen will have to join Mr. Draghi and Mr. Kuroda in another round of QE sometime probably late 2016. That's my prediction.
All right, let's talk about Saudi Arabia. What in the world are these people doing?
Oh my God! I mean, you know what bothers me more than anything. I mean, why are we affiliated with the Sunni government in Saudi Arabia? Why have we picked sides in this ancient tribal battle between Shia and Sunni? I have no idea, but what business do we have with boats near Iran, and why are we picking sides? Why don't we just mind our own business and let these people fight it out? It's as if we don't fight Saudi Arabia's battles, if we don't pick sides with the Sunnis against the Shias, that Saudi Arabia is not going to sell their oil to us? I mean, oil is a fungible commodity. That's what Saudi Arabia does. They produce oil. If they don't sell it to us, then somebody else is going to sell it to us. And why do we care?
Obama's policies are so convoluted, I can't figure out whose side he's on. Is he on the side of the Sunnis or the Shiites? But the situation with Saudi Arabia in relation to the U.S. petrodollar going back to 1973 with Nixon and Kissinger, okay, the petrodollar is unraveling in front of our eyes. Mm-hmm. How long can Saudi Arabia go with keeping their currency pegged to the U.S. dollar?
Not much longer. That's for sure. So maybe they'll switch to some, special drawing rights. I don't know, Rick. This is what I know for sure, is that the bear market in gold is just about over. Because if you look around at the SDRs, if you look at the U.S. dollar, if you look at the renminbi, which was just added to the SDR, if you look at any major currency, the euro, certainly the yen, these paper currencies are being depreciated at breakneck speed. And yet we see gold, as it's priced in dollars, has been stuck in a brutal bear market for years. But that is just about over. And that's why I think if you want to protect your investments, you want to protect your purchasing power, this is an opportunity that I have never seen before and probably will never see again in my lifetime, where you can buy an ounce of gold, about $1,100, and why would you not want to own that investment when sovereign nations are insolvent, when real interest rates are negative, when nominal rates are practically zero, and the chance for conflagration around the world has really never been greater.
You mentioned Davos. At the beginning of the World Economic Summit, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Summit, made an astounding statement. He said that there is the potential of 1 billion refugees flooding into Europe. And I think he was alluding that there is a global crisis coming. He didn't say a meltdown of the financial system, but what else would produce 1 billion immigrants coming from the southern hemisphere into the northern hemisphere?
Well, it would have to be the Cold War between Shia and Sunni. The proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia turns hot. And if that turns hot, then you're going to have these people flooding all over the planet. And the rise of fascism, the rise of nationalism is going to spike. This is what's occurred throughout history: World War I, World War II. And I'm a market strategist and an economist, but you have to be blind not to see what's happening. and go through history, see how these wars have started. And NATO now it's been expanded. I don't know why we're picking on Vladimir Putin, who's trying to defend his egress into the Black Sea through Ukraine. I mean, we have the tenuous situation now across the globe where we're not far from starting another global war. It could start between Shia and Sunni. It could be a war between NATO and Russia. But we have to be very cogent and cognizant of that in our models and our investment strategies.
Did you hear the statement by the chief of the Swiss Army several weeks ago? He told the entire Swiss population, arm yourself.
Well, they already are.
I know, but he told everyone, go get another gun. All right.
Well, Switzerland is one of those few nations. There's never any problems with violence with guns, but they're required by law to have one. So, and Switzerland doesn't exactly have a history of being an aggressive people. But I mean, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear what you just said. I never heard that statement from that person from Switzerland. But that's eye-opening.
Yeah, if you put it in context, imagine the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff telling the American people, arm yourself.
Well, the exact opposite's happening here. The assault on the Second Amendment has never been louder.
Michael, going back to the markets, what explains the bipolar reaction of the markets? Last night China dropped 6%, and as you and I are talking right now, Wall Street's up.
Yeah, well, Wall Street algorithms are now programmed to buy the S&P futures, mini futures, anytime oil catches a bid. So oil caught a bid, and I'm not quite sure why, but it did, and that's why the S&P 500 is soaring today. As of this interview, it's up about 240 points.
Machines are purchasing and not people.
No, these are all algorithms written by 20-year-old computer geeks. So the algorithm now spits out oil up by the S&P 500. That's how it works. But I have to tell you, the People's Bank of China injected more liquidity overnight than they ever have before. And the Bank of Japan is threatening more QE, and so is Mario Draghi in the Eurozone. Yet these markets can't support the levels that they are at because they've become so detached from underlying growth. That's the problem. These central bankers have, like I said, QE worked well when it was to push down long-term interest rates. But interest rates are already at zero. So what value is there really in buying more long-term debt? Its value is greatly attenuated. And that's why I don't think there's any hope for this market. And I think investors should be very cautious here. You should be short the market if at all possible. You should be in cash. You should own some precious metals as a hedge. That's what I do here at Pento Portfolio Strategies. That's the portfolio I have. It's doing very well so far in 2016. And I'm not going to buy Amazon at 900 times earnings. I'm going to buy selective puts on certain high-flying NASDAQ stocks. And I am going to hold cash, and I'm going to own gold. That's the strategy.
All right. Michael Pento, president and founder of Pento Portfolio Strategies. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for having me on, Rick.
Well, let's close today's program with a reading from the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes. Many of us are concerned about the state of the world's financial system. A lot of people concerned about their wealth and holding on to their assets. But the Bible puts it all in perspective. In Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, the Word of God says, "What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beast, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to the dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. And who can bring him to see what will be after him?